big headlines like he was having with the PGF story. So, I don't know. I think, isn't he like a tax historian or an economic historian or something like that?
He's a biographer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite a nice. Way to go from there to the National Party finance spokesperson.
If anybody's written a book, if anybody has written a book by Paul Goldsmith, I'd love to hear from you. And what was it like? I think he wrote a book about John Banks and a couple of other people, actually. Finally, on a final note, what about, have you heard of Jackie Dean, Janet?
Yes, I have. But yes, she does deserve that 4. She definitely deserves the 4. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And the others that Audrey's rated low. Mark Mitchell has failed to fire as well, and Alfred, as you pointed out, has failed to fire as well. I mean, they've got to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and work harder.
I think that was a colossal mistake that Alfred Nuttall made earlier this year when he went, what I think was in effect going shopping for a new political party. Yeah. I think that was a huge mistake because people were not keen on the site, seeing a politician being that cynical.
And he was flying kites, wasn't he? It was simply just flying a kite. Oh, let me just do the old John Key thing of throw an idea in the air and see what happens to it. And, of course, it was ill-considered right from the get-go.
Hey, now, just on a final note before we wrap up the show, and it's been a pretty sort of a pretty grunty show in many respects. A lot of people saying, thank you for airing that piece on suicide and saying thank you for allowing yourself to be upset. It's just something that just that one response that came through and the absence of music. As a musician myself, I just really related to that. But I want to talk about a light note, desk dining. It's the norm and long gone are daily hour-long lunches with workers and colleagues. In a comment piece online, a Washington Post journalist has lamented the decline of colleagues going away from the office to enjoy a meal together and to forget about work. And in a quick Twitter poll, most cited time pressures as the reason why they didn't leave their screens for lunch. So just around the panel, are we missing out, do you think, by, I don't know, not socialising with our colleagues away from the office? We tend to, and I put myself now in the guilty category here of eating my lunch in front of the computer desk. Morgan, what's your take on this first?
Oh, it just reinforces my point. The internet was a mistake.
Yeah,
because you're sitting in front of the screen scrolling. I bet it's terrible, and I think there's a kind of social pressure at work too, because as soon as one person starts eating their lunch at their desk and looking very diligent, looking like they're doing a lot of work, suddenly you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm slacking off.
That's the one.
I have to start working at my desk. I have to start eating at my desk, I have to look like I'm busy, look busy.
Yeah. But here's the thing, it's not that good for making connections, human connections, really, is it? The internet.
Well, that's what the Washington Post piece says. Yeah. Exactly.
I say, bring back the lunch. Bring back the lunch. I'm a big proponent of it. And particularly the long one.
Yes,
the long one's the best one of all.
Have you ever been to a long lunch, Janet Wilson?
Many.
Exactly.
Many.
Absolutely. Bring it back indeed. Hey, you've been fantastic, both of you. Thank you so much for being with us. Morgan, Godfrey and Janet Wilson. I'm Wallace Chapman, the panel. See you tomorrow, 3:45.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the government's newly launched $45 million Lunch in Schools program leaves some hungry for details. What kind of food? Will schools make it themselves, and why not feed every student? Unimmunised travellers are being warned to stay out of Auckland as measles spreads, with hundreds of students forced to stay at home. And health officials scrambling to identify passengers from a flight carrying an infected passenger. The newly minted All Black squad faces the tough questions from their young fans in the provinces, and the British Prime Minister is accused of committing a smash and grab on democracy and Auckland's latest mega mall.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A daily free lunch is to be served as a trial in 30 primary and intermediate schools from the first term next year. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced the trial in Rotorua this afternoon. She said fixing child poverty will take time, but one thing the government can do straight away is make sure children get at least one decent meal a day. The intention is to extend the trial to 120 schools the following year, and a decision will be made after that about whether to continue or extend the program. The Children's Commissioner Andrew Beecroft has warmly welcomed the move.
I think it's a genuine red letter day. It's a giant step forward. For at least 30 years we've fiddled and done insufficient for children. We've lacked any policy clear direction. This is a coordinated, integrated plan for the first time. Properly implemented, it could be a game changer.
The Children's Commissioner Andrew Beecroft. Meanwhile, Ms Ardern is urging anyone who has not been immunised against measles to get vaccinated. The Ministry of Health is trying to contain the country's worst measles outbreak in 22 years by warning people not to travel to Auckland if they have not been immunised, for fear they'll take the disease home with them when they leave. Of the 849 cases confirmed nationally this year, 731 have been in Auckland. In the past 2 weeks alone, there have been 230 confirmed cases in Auckland, compared to just 10 in all other regions. The Prime Minister says the smartest and safest option is being vaccinated.
I'm worried about those who choose not to be vaccinated. It is the most important thing that we can do to prevent the spread of an outbreak like this. And so again, we just encourage everyone to make sure that they are vaccinated.
Jacinda Ardern. 3 new cases in Waikato in the past 2 weeks have been confirmed, and a medical officer of health, Richard Hoskins, says at least one of them is linked to the South Auckland outbreak. He says they're still working to identify everyone who has been exposed, and the risk of further cases in Waikato is high. And passengers on a flight from Samoa to Auckland last week are being warned they may have come into contact with measles. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says a person who didn't know they had the disease left Samoa on Air New Zealand flight NZ 997 on the night of Monday, August the 19th. An emergency doctor says delays in patients being seen are getting worse because of under-resourcing throughout the whole health system. Doctor unions have raised concerns about how often patients arriving by ambulance have to wait to get into emergency departments. The president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, John Bonning, says if it's an emergency, people will be treated. But, he says, for other patients, the delay can affect their outcomes.
If somebody is waiting with angina that might be turning into a heart attack, if somebody has a critical infection that can get worse, and time to antibiotics is a key thing for patients with sepsis. So there are some time-critical conditions that may not be apparently immediately obvious when they first come in.
John Bonning says surgical and medical wards need more resourcing to take the strain off emergency departments. The 16-year-old Swedish climate change activist Greta Thunberg has told an audience in New York that Donald Trump refuses to listen to climate science. Ms Thunberg arrived in New York by yacht from England earlier in the day to take part in a UN summit. The BBC's Chris Butler reports.
The United Nations is used to welcoming world leaders, but this reception was by any standards pretty extraordinary. A flotilla of boats was sent out to greet Greta Thunberg as she arrived in New York, and waiting on shore were crowds of young environmental campaigners who she's inspired. Greta refused to travel by plane because of the environmental damage caused by flights. Instead, she's arrived on a racing yacht powered by the wind and sun, attracting a huge amount of publicity.
Chris Butler in New York. A rare atmospheric event may be about to send cold and unsettled weather the country's way for the next 2 months. NIWA says a heatwave known as a sudden stratospheric warming, or SSW, is happening about 30 kilometres above Antarctica and will peak tomorrow. Chen Liu reports.
Meteorologist Ben Noor says the polar vortex usually locks cold air in over the South Pole, but when it's weakened by an SSW, cold air can move north from the pole. Mr. Noor says that will increase the odds of cooler and stormy weather in September and October. Only 2 previous sudden stratospheric warmings have been recorded in New Zealand, one in September 2002 and the other in September 2010. Both brought cold, wet weather. Kuo Chen Liu, Aho.
Canterbury public health officials say continuing to chlorinate Christchurch's water supply would be wise. The supply has been treated since 2017 engineering reports revealed the city's water network was susceptible to contamination. The region's medical officer of health, Alistair Humphrey, told city councillors today the health ministry's new water standards have a reduced tolerance of risk. He has recommended chlorination continue until the city's water plan is approved by central government. The plan is expected to be delivered to the ministry by the end of next month. It's 5:05. The All Blacks lock Sam Whitelock says it's refreshing to get out into the community and mingle with fans as anticipation builds ahead of the Rugby World Cup. A day after their selection in the New Zealand squad for the tournament, Whitelock and 3 teammates visited Muslim children in Christchurch with a charity that supports young people affected by the March mosque attacks. 6 other groups of All Blacks also took part in community events around the country today. Whitelock says they enjoyed the chance to get away from the day-to-day grind.
Normally we're pretty busy with actual rugby training and things, and it's quite nice to take this time and get out into our community and spend time with everyone that lives and breathes being Kiwis.
Sam Whitelock. Title contenders Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams are both through safely to the third round at the US Tennis Open in New York. Djokovic, the men's top seed, won his second round match against Argentina's Juan Ignacio Londero in straight sets. Williams, the women's 8th seed, was not so comfortable in victory, having to fight back from a set down before eventually powering past fellow American Catherine McNally. And in provincial rugby tonight, Wellington host Counties Manukau. That's the news.
Boris's Brexit battle.
There is a constitutional crisis and a huge constitutional battle unfolding here in London.
Water pressure.
The system has failed Maori and non-Maori actually, that our rivers have got to the state that they've got in.
And packing up the pop-up.
We've always said from the beginning that our plans are to share the magic of Shakespeare performed at Pop-Up Globe by our company in cities around the world, and that's what we're going to do.
Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, advancing women in professional rugby. They're getting out in the paddock more than men all around the world these days. And after 10, having her gâteau and eating it. Kiwi Jennifer Andrews on Living the Dream in the south of France. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, mainly fine, the odd shower in the west tonight. Auckland to Horowhenua, including Coromandel, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Isolated showers, cloud increasing tomorrow, then rain north of Taranaki from the afternoon, clearing from the south later in the day. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly fine. Isolated showers in Bay of Plenty tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow afternoon with scattered rain. For Wairarapa, Kapiti and Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough. Mainly fine, isolated showers overnight, retreating to the Tararua Range and District tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, brief showers spreading north tonight, fine tomorrow. Southland and Clutha, occasional showers retreating to the south coast early tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers easing tonight, becoming fine in Westland. Cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the coast and fjords. For the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, rain overnight, then isolated showers. RNZ National, just past 5:08.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A program to feed hungry kids with a free lunch at school each day is going to be trialled in 30 schools next year. The Prime Minister announced the initiative at the launch of the Child and Youth Wellbeing Strategy at Kai Tau Intermediate School in Rotorua, which is one of the schools taking part. The intention is to extend the pilot to 21,000 children in 120 schools by the beginning of 2021. Our reporter, Andrew McRae, was at the launch.
I think it's like a really good thing that they're doing this, because I know a couple of my friends who actually, I can notice that they don't have as much lunch as me, or they don't have any lunch at all.
Kai Tau Intermediate student Siki Rika. She's happy her school's part of the trial.
Like, who doesn't like free food?
Kai Tau Intermediate Principal Phil Palfrey says no child should come to school hungry.
I can't even focus if I haven't had something to eat at lunchtime. I can't focus properly. How can our children, who have to expend lots more energy, especially if they're doing more physical exercise and the like?
He believes about 20% of his 400 students don't get adequate healthy food to sustain them during the day. Every student at the school will receive a free lunch.
And that's what I've always believed, that you don't differentiate. You just say that that New Zealand will be a country that when the students go to school at lunchtime, they have food.
The Children's Commissioner Andrew Beecroft, who attended the launch, believes it's a red-letter day for the country's children. He says the ultimate aim of providing lunches in all schools can't come fast enough.
To have free school lunches for every primary and secondary school student. There'll be so many benefits. We know that well-fed children prosper, their health is better, obesity levels are down, they're better involved in educational outcome is improved. So on every level, in my view, it's the right thing to do.
The Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, says the pilot in 30 schools next year will set a benchmark for a future rollout.
We believe, from evidence that we've seen other places, that will provide us with the evidence to say to New Zealand, this has a positive effect beyond just the common sense one for New Zealand children. We're going to step it out to 120 schools because we know how to make it work for those schools, and then the goal would be to keep stepping it out across New Zealand.
The 30 schools in the pilot are centred around the Bay of Plenty in Gisborne. In the Rotorua for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tēnei.
The Prime Minister's given assurances that the government will keep funding other school food programs alongside its just announced $45 million lunch program. But there's no details of exactly how the new service will be delivered. Individual schools are being left to decide that themselves. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told us via Live View from Rotorua that today's announcement is hugely important to her.
People have heard me talk enough about some of my motivations for being in politics to know how important this is, not just the food in schools, but the whole child and youth wellbeing strategy. I think if we as politicians focus our minds on the well-being of kids, then we will be fixing so many of those long-term challenges and setting ourselves on a really solid path for the future. It is going to take us some time though, and so while we've made some really great progress, particularly on child poverty, the Food in Schools program is our way of acknowledging that in the meantime the least we can do is make sure that those kids who need it most are getting food in their tummies and are ready to learn.
So, food in schools, 20 schools for the pilot as such. How have you chosen those schools?
So we're starting, yes, with roughly about 5,000 students. We have focused in particularly around the Bay of Plenty area, around the East Coast. There'll be some in the South as well. We're looking at a cross-section of schools that will give us an idea of, how to deal with area schools, how to deal with rural schools, schools where they may have a breakfast program, just to make sure that we get the settings right. Then by 2021, we'll be moving into 120 schools covering 20,000 children. And again, we'll be looking at those schools where we know children will benefit the most.
But what particular characteristics did you look at when choosing the schools? The announcement said these are schools where there are tranches of children who are suffering from deprivation. So did you use a decile rating or what characteristics?
Not just decile, but we are looking at those areas where we know there is a lower socioeconomic population around. So we know there is poverty being experienced in the community. But for the early schools, we also, as I've said, we're looking for schools that can help us design the program going forward. What we've done here is not said that there'll only be one way of delivering this program. Within each school, we expect that they may choose to do it a little bit differently. I've talked to some schools, for instance, who've suggested they might like to try and create employment out of this program, make the school lunches themselves as a way of having a double benefit for their community. Others may choose to contract, say, a local bakery. So we'll work alongside those schools and get a real sense of what's going to work best. At the same time, it does matter having a supportive community. So that's part of our consultation, going out with the Ministry of Education and finding a mixture of those kinds of schools.
I do want to talk about delivery in more detail, but first off, why not go universal? Why not remove the potential for stigma and put it across the board?
Well, I agree with you on the question of stigma. Any school that we go into, every child will be provided with a lunch. Some programs you might have heard in the past selectively provide food for just single students who may need it. We don't want to stigmatise children, so wherever we go, it will be for every child in that school. As I've said, we are for this program. We want to get the design right, but we'll scale up to 20,000 children by 2021, and that'll give us a chance to see the real benefit and the impact in the communities where we're working, and that'll then be a choice for that government of that day, which I hope will be us, to determine what we do next with that. But at this stage, we are quite focused on those children we know will benefit the most.
Is it a cost thing to not roll it out universally? Because even if you give all the kids in one school lunch, it is a decile rating by another measure, isn't it? People will look at that school and go, oh, that's a food in schools school.
And look, this at the moment is an investment of over $40 million to deliver this program over 2 years. But we want to look at the results that it generates and be able to make the case then for what happens next with the program. So I take the point you're making, but at the same time, I want to make sure we get this right, first of all, and then start looking at whether or not there would be that wider benefit to go even further than that again. I expect there would be, but let's let the program run and then see those results. At the same time, Lisa, I do think it's important to point out we do ultimately need to solve the core of this issue, which is child poverty and inadequate incomes for families. We have put in the families package, 380,000 families benefiting from that lift in income. In the last budget, we had another package again focused on families that were really doing it tough.
And
we do want to solve the core problem, but this is alongside that.
So, Prime Minister, why then the decision to do it this way rather than put this money directly into the pockets of families?
And we've done both. So the vast majority of our initiatives have been directly into the pockets of families.
Why not
so
this
for
one,
380,000.
Sorry to interrupt, Prime Minister, but you'll be
again,
aware the welfare group, obviously your own welfare group, suggested raising benefits. So I'm just wondering, what consideration did you give to putting this particular pot of money straight back to families?
Well, I'm happy to answer that. In the 2019, the budget we've just had, we spent over $500 million on a package that did just that, and that went straight to families through things like indexing benefits to wages, and that's just so we don't continue to get that massive lag that we have at the moment with families falling further and further behind. Now, when you take into consideration that what we're doing here is roughly over $40 million, you can get huge reach with a program like that. If you then just put that simply into those other reforms, that just costs a much larger amount. But we have done both. The issue for us is we know it's going to take time for us to turn around child poverty in this country. We've set ambitious targets to do it, but at the same time I'm not willing for children day in, day out to go to school without having the food that they need and being ready to learn. So it's about doing both.
So in terms of delivery, are you specifying the type of food here? Will it be sustainable? Will the food come locally, or how's it going to work?
Yeah, so we are going to make sure that there will be guidelines. There'll be guidelines that just set out the expectation that I think everyone would have, that when a lunch is being provided, that it'll be a healthy lunch. And then beyond that, we'll be working, as I say, to make sure alongside schools that we work up some of the other expectations. And so that's why we're starting with a smaller group and then scaling up to those 20,000 children, because those are things we want to design together.
How much of the budget is for, capital investment? Like, will schools need kitchens? Will they need facilities to heat up food, refrigerators and things like that?
Yeah, good question. That's why it'll be designed school by school. Some schools, for instance, like area schools, often may have some of those facilities, and they may choose to prepare the lunches within their own school, and that might provide an employment opportunity. We've built in a per child cost and a few overhead costs as well. You'll forgive me for not giving you the precise numbers child by child, because we do want to allow schools to be able to negotiate if they choose to bring in a provider to be able to do that competitively. But each school may choose to do it differently. differently, and that's what we're going to test over the next year.
The government already contributes to a number of programs that put food in some level into schools, like Kickstart and Fruit in Schools. Why not use some of those programs and utilise that infrastructure and know-how rather than set up a totally separate entity?
And there will be things we can learn from those, but the ones you've just named, Fruit in Schools, obviously not as comprehensive as a Lunch in Schools program. Kickstart, we have breakfast programs offered in different parts of the country, and we will test how this lunch program interacts with that. But of course, it's not the kind of reach necessarily that we've talked about in terms of universalism, in terms of reaching the number in all cases, as the examples you've provided. And so those are things we will, as we go, check how this program may work alongside some of those others, but many schools have neither.
I know you have to go, you're pressed for time, but do you anticipate those other programs you've just talked about will continue to be funded?
I do. We're not anticipating changing anything here with that. You'll know that some of those programs, for instance, are provided alongside the business community. We don't anticipate that changing. We certainly wouldn't like to see that change. This is a program that's about providing a healthy lunch, midway through the day, keep children ready to learn and ready to engage. And we'll be doing it universally within a school to make sure that we benefit as many children as possible without creating any stigma.
And that's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. It's almost 5:22 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Would love to hear from you on this. Do you think that the Lunch in School program goes far enough? High schools and preschools are excluded at the moment. Is this the best way to help these families, or should the money go straight into their pockets? Let us know what you think. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anyone travelling to Auckland is being told they must be immunised against measles as the country deals with its worst epidemic of the highly contagious disease in 22 years. There are at least 849 cases of measles nationwide, with 731 of them in Auckland. The Ministry of Health says babies travelling to or living in Auckland must also have the jab, and that regular 15-month vaccination, including MMR, have been brought forward to 12 months. Meanwhile, health officials are scrambling to identify people who travelled on an Air New Zealand flight from Samoa to Auckland with an infected person. That flight was 9 days ago. The centre of the outbreak today is Manurewa High School, which has 13 new cases. The school sent 300 students home and told families to keep their children at home today if they can't show they are immunised. Alex Pirani and cameraman Nick Monroe went out to the morning drop-off at Manurewa High.
With cases increasing every day, students arriving at Manurewa High School this morning had to have proof they had measles immunisation. Some parents weren't even aware there was an outbreak, and students arriving without their records were sent home to find them.
Most of our classes is empty as. There's only about 12 students in some of my classes, because a lot of them has been sent home.
The school posted on Facebook last night that 300 students had been sent home, and it's warning families to keep their kids home if they're not sure. This mum was happy with the level of communication.
So you think the school's taken all the right precautions here?
Definitely. Even in the schools around, other schools around, notices are going out, emails, texts, it's awesome.
Principal Pete Jones says the first case was weeks ago, but he didn't see the outbreak coming.
It just got to a scale and a level where it was really difficult to manage from a logistics point of view. Like I say, over 300 students sent home.
Students not immunised have to stay away until Monday, call the school and say they're not immunised. Pete Jones says nurses from counties Manukau will be in the school giving shots to those who haven't had them, but the difficulty is trying to find out who has them and who hasn't.
Should the school have that data when students are enrolled?
So in theory, yes, and we ask for it, but the challenge is the data accurate? And what's proving through this exercise is that data isn't accurate. We're just working through to try and get a more current feel about what the situation is.
Homai Primary School and Early Childhood Education Centre is just a stone's throw from the high school. Principal Rosina Wikaira says the phones have been running hot, but her records are tight. There's only one student not immunised and they will receive it today.
Don't panic, but please do keep your children home if there's any symptoms. So we've got all our information on windows, we've got them for our staff, we've had them in our newsletters and sent letters home. Another letter's going home today in support of our high school, because a lot of our siblings also are, they have older siblings at the high school. So of course they're in the same home. So we're just making sure that if they're the same families, keep them at home.
Pete Jones says he has sent 2 staff members home as a precaution, and the school has had to cancel events due to the outbreak.
We had an awesome event planned tonight with all the Auckland mayoral candidates coming to school, which we were really looking forward to, which had been organised and planned by our students, but unfortunately with the circumstances we've had to say no to that.
Pete Jones says it's inevitable there will be more cases. Symptoms of measles include fever, cough, runny nose, sore red eyes, followed by a rash that starts on the face or neck and spreads to the rest of the body. Auckland Regional Public Health Service says immunisation is the best protection against measles, and the MMR vaccine is available free from your GP. In Manurewa for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And there's more information on that flight from Samoa to Auckland carrying a measles-infected passenger. If you were on Air New Zealand flight NZ997, which landed at 1:23 a.m. on August 20th, you will have been exposed to the disease. So check for symptoms and ensure you are vaccinated. That flight again, NZ997, it landed at 1:23 a.m. on August 20th. The All Blacks World Cup squad faced their first test today with some big questions from small fans. They were greeted with haka and waiata as they fanned out across the country, from Whangarei and Matamata to Rolleston and Queenstown. Brenton Van Nistelrooy filed this report.
A spine-tingling haka for All Blacks captain Kieran Reid, Scott Barrett, Matt Todd, George Bridge and Sevu Reece on their arrival at Wakatipu High School, while another 5 World Cup squad members, including Sam Cane, were welcomed to Hinuera School near Matamata with song. Cane then fielded questions from the classroom.
What makes a good All Black on the field and off the field?
We try and be the best teammates we can, and we try and work hard on our skills so that on the field we can do some cool things and score some cool tries, and then off the field it's pretty similar. It's about looking after each other, being respectful. If we can do those things, normally we get some pretty good results. Before Atu Molly led the 5 All Blacks in song. 4 of their teammates stayed in town, with Sam Whitelock, Richie Mo'unga, Ofa Tu'ongafasi and Sonny Bill Williams in Christchurch, visiting Muslim children from the Canterbury Resilience Foundation, a charity which supports youth affected by the March mosque attacks.
A cool initiative by the All Blacks to show some love to those affected down here in Christchurch, and obviously me and Ofa being Muslims, we're proud to come and represent All Blacks and show some love.
They played touch rugby with the kids, something everyone got a thrill from.
It seems like such a small gesture, like just coming in to teach us some skills, but honestly it really means a lot. And just to have the opportunity, I don't know, to have them come in and just get people together and have fun. Yeah, it really means a lot.
It's pretty cool to be here with a community that's obviously had a bit of a tough time recently, and it's cool to hopefully spread a few smiles, and that's what we're trying to do.
Sam Whitelock enjoying the chance to get away from the day-to-day grind.
Normally we're pretty busy with actual rugby training and things, and it's quite nice to take this time and get out into our community and spend time with everyone that lives and breathes being Kiwis.
After the weekend off, the All Blacks will get back to work on Monday ahead of their final pre-Rugby World Cup test against Tonga on Saturday week. For Checkpoint, call Brenton Van Nistelrooy Aho.
Coming up on on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Boris Johnson's dramatic Brexit gamble. A lack of emergency beds sees patients stranded outside in ambulances, and the Ngāti Hine elder described as the most civil of servants is laid to rest. Do get in touch about anything you've seen on the program so far this evening. 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister says the government's free school lunches program can be implemented differently at each school. A trial of daily free lunches will start next year at 30 primary and intermediate schools. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint some schools have expressed the desire to make the lunches themselves and to use the scheme to create employment opportunities in their communities. And the Children's Commissioner, Andrew Beecroft, has warmly welcomed the program, saying if it is properly implemented, it could be a game changer. The Ministry of Health is trying to contain the country's worst measles outbreak in 22 years by warning people not to travel to Auckland if they have not been immunised. Of the 849 cases confirmed nationally this year, most have been in Auckland, with 230 cases confirmed in the last week alone. An emergency doctor says delays in patients being seen are getting worse because of under-resourcing in the whole system. Doctors' unions say hospitals in some regions regularly have to keep patients waiting in ambulances because emergency departments are packed. The president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine says surgical and medical wards need more resourcing to take the strain off EDs. A former employee of the Christchurch District Health Board today admitted stealing from the DHB. The Serious Fraud Office charged the woman with one charge of false accounting. The Christchurch District Court was told she directed patients to pay for their treatments by putting the money into a bank account she controlled. She has been given interim name suppression and was remanded on bail until she appears in court again. The British government's decision to suspend Parliament for nearly 5 crucial weeks in the run-up to the withdrawal from the European Union has provoked a massive backlash. Thousands of protesters took to the streets in numerous cities, and an anti-suspension petition garnered more than 1 million signatures within hours. Opposition parties and some government MPs have also been highly critical of the move. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining me, this is Checkpoint, and you've come at the perfect moment because Nona Peltier is joining me in the studio for business. Nona, business confidence, ooh, not good, yeah?
No, it's actually quite poor and it's deteriorating further. And so we've had some pretty bad numbers in the past, but the ones that we've seen today basically are probably the first time we've seen them. Businesses' own view of their own outlook has fallen to the negative category for the first time in a decade, which is significant. You know, we're talking about a net 52% of businesses expect conditions to deteriorate in the year ahead, and that's compared with 44% the last month, and that's the lowest reading in 11 years. So serious concern because if you look at the economy in itself, the ANZ, which is their survey, have suggested that, considering these numbers, you also have to look at where we are. So, for example, monetary conditions are pretty good. We've got fairly robust commodity prices, a positive population growth. But the risk is that we're going to talk ourselves into, a recession. And this isn't something that we've heard of for the first time. We've heard this before, and it's been a concern of the Reserve Bank governor. And one of the things that we did find today was that there was a visitor from San Francisco who's part of the Federal Reserve Bank. And her name is Mary Daly, and she was speaking to a group of, banker types, economists and so on. It was an invitation-only event, although early on she did give a keynote address, which the media were allowed to attend. And she was talking about just the situation, because, of course, she'll know what's going on in the United States, and just how downbeat people are. And that this sentiment, which we're seeing in the UK and all over the world, is really flowing through. And she warns that monetary policy has its limits and that banks may have to work together with governments to improve the situation. And this is some of what she had to say.
Right now, and for the last year, it's been like a strong wind blowing against us. And sometimes it gusts, but mostly it's just strong. So you've got the strong wind that sometimes gusts, and that's the overall level of uncertainty we're dealing with. That uncertainty has had an impact on business investment. We've already seen it. It's had an impact on business confidence. We see that. And when I talk to my business contacts, which I do regularly and frequently, that's the number one thing they refer to is the level of uncertainty that they have to deal with.
Yeah, that's interesting, because what you're saying from that survey and what the bank is saying is that overall the economic indicators are solid or good, yet people are seeing the bucket as half empty, not half full.
Not just half empty, draining quickly. And I think that's because of the, we've seen this in Asia again today. The rising, the intensifying of the global trade war between really China and the United States. And then what's happened in Britain with the proroguing of Parliament, suspending Parliament for 5 weeks. That doesn't instill confidence in anyone. People are feeling very unsure of the situation, of where things are going, the Brexit, no Brexit, that type of thing. So what happened today was our market was pretty stable in terms of the share market. We've had a lot of days, as I said yesterday, 7 days this month where we had a movement of 1%. Mm-hmm. Today was only 11 points, a very small movement to 10,580 points down. So, I mean, not that many down, 11 points down to 10,580. But our Kiwi dropped, and it dropped on the sentiment. So because, of course, this just fuels the monetary policy position where will the Reserve Bank cut some more, possibly, because you're going to have to try and stimulate the economy to offset some of this really negative sentiment. 63.1 cents.
What was it, 63.7 yesterday?
Yeah,
was it?
So it's a substantial drop. I mean, it dropped about a half a cent. And at 63 cents, it's pretty low. 93.8 Australian and 51.7 pence. And considering the pence also fell, that just goes to show you just the level of where the Kiwi is because of our sentiment here. And yet, we talked to this guy from the S&P, he's a global economist, saying that, New Zealand is... of all the countries that are exposed to this trade war, are probably going to do better than most.
Thanks, Nona, with that Cherry Business Update. That was Nona Peltier. And we were mentioning the UK there. It has been described as a smash and grab on democracy and a constitutional outrage. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has taken a dramatic gamble by suspending Parliament in the weeks leading up to the Brexit deadline of October 31st. It's designed to frustrate attempts to stop a no-deal Brexit, but it's sparked outrage among opposition parties and Tory party MPs who oppose no deal and saw protests spring up outside Westminster and Downing Street. The ABC's Samantha Hawley has this report on the day's developments.
Outside Downing Street they came to make their feelings known.
I'm angry. This is not something, it's not in my name, it's not something I believe in, it's outrageous.
I came here to protest the fact that Boris Johnson appears to be riding roughshod over democracy.
The monarch and Brexit are colliding because of a bold move by Boris Johnson that some say is a very risky gamble.
Look, we need to get on with our domestic agenda, and that's why we're announcing a Queen's speech for October the 14th. Okay.
Prime Minister Johnson denies it's about robbing the Parliament of a chance to debate Brexit, but the anger among his own ranks runs deep. In a statement, the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, expressed his displeasure. This move represents a constitutional outrage, he said, declaring it was blindingly obvious that the move is designed to stop Parliament debating Brexit. Not so, says Mr Johnson.
And there will be ample time on both sides of that crucial October the 17th summit, ample time in Parliament for MPs to debate.
MP Anna Soubry described it as a ruthless move.
It is an absolute disgrace and it is completely unconstitutional. And in a way, even more outrageously, it's put our Queen in a very difficult situation.
She was backed by Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
He's acting like some kind of tin pot dictator.
The opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has demanded an election and also written to the Queen asking for a meeting of his own. He says it's a smash and grab move on democracy.
It is a constitutional outrage. This is an attempt by a Prime Minister who was elected by a very small number of people in the country as a Conservative Party membership to ride roughshod over Parliament and prevent any legislation or debate that would stop this country leaving the EU without a deal and all the problems that it will cause.
Paul Connew is a former editor of the Sunday Mirror.
I think Boris Johnson is taking a huge gamble. He's now in a position where is he acting like a Democrat or is he acting like a Machiavellian demagogue? And I think a lot of people will tilt towards the latter.
And if there is a general election, which seems to be increasingly likely, can Boris Johnson win it?
I think the gamble that Boris has taken that he might have a surge, of popularity that might get him a Tory majority. But most forecasts would suggest we might be more likely to end up with another hung parliament.
In Britain, Prime Ministers can restart a parliamentary session with a speech from the Queen. But this is a nation already in a political mess. Expect more chaos next week when MPs return from their summer holidays.
Samantha Hawley there from Westminster. A discovery in Ethiopia is challenging ideas about how the first humans evolved from ape-like ancestors. Archaeologists found a nearly complete skull dating back 3.8 million years. They've published details of the specimen in the journal Nature. Priscilla Huff reports.
Johannes Haile Selassie of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History says he's found the first complete fossil skull of Australopithecus anamensis. It's even older than the skeleton of the better-known Lucy, also known as Australopithecus afarensis. She's thought to be just over 3 million years old. This new skull, nicknamed MRD, is from a group that's up to twice as old. Haile Selassie was working in the Afar region of Ethiopia when he spotted some fossils. That led to his eureka moment.
My first instinct was that these two pieces would perfectly join. I picked up the maxilla and I picked up the cranium and click. Perfect cranium.
That is a complete skull of Australopithecus anamensis. Earlier, only small bones had been found.
This is really a game changer in a lot of ways and answers old questions that we've had lingering around for decades.
Until now, scientists say there's been a big fossil gap between our earliest known human ancestors, who are about 6 million years old, and Lucy's group, much younger at 3 million.
But the key point here is that afarensis overlapped in time with Australopithecus anamensis. That changed the whole mode of evolution.
Further analysis of rocks nearby point to a deeper discovery, that the two human ancestors were on the Earth in the same place at the same time.
But rather, the ancestor, the potential ancestor of Australopithecus anamensis and its descendant Australopithecus afarensis actually overlapped in time, at least for 100,000 years, between 3.9 and 3.8 million years ago. So this is a major discovery.
The scientists say it's good to put a face to the name Australopithecus anamensis.
Priscilla Huff with that report. And back home, a doctors' union says they want more resources and fewer excuses to stop ambulance ramping. Now, ramping is when patients are stuck in ambulances at hospital bays because there isn't a bed free for them in the emergency department. The Resident Doctors Association is worried that ramping will put patients and staff at risk. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever with the details.
The Resident Doctors Association National Secretary Dr Deborah Powell has heard of ambulance ramping taking place in Auckland and Waikato on a weekly basis, sometimes for days at a time.
In Auckland, we've had days with 200% occupancy in ED over the last 3 weeks. That's twice as many people in the ED that we're basically designed to have. So you can understand if you're getting that sort of demand for health services in our EDs, it's causing pressure at both the ambulance end but also within the hospital itself in terms of there being enough beds in the hospital to take those ED patients.
Dr Powell says it's due to a lack of bed spaces and resourcing.
Of course, one of the resource problems is that we don't have enough staff to deal with the patients we have. So you've already got overworked people having another stress added to them. And it's not a good look at all. It would be fair to say that the unions are deeply concerned about workload and stress and the health and safety risks we're running.
She says the doctors' union doesn't want to hear excuses about the previous government's lack of funding.
Blaming someone else and not getting on and dealing with it is not okay. We have a problem, Minister. It needs to be dealt with, and it means resources. Stop blaming 10 years' worth of underfunding and start funding us correctly.
St John Medical Director Dr Tony Smith says the ambulance service is not experiencing ramping the same way as its counterparts in Australia and the UK. He says St John does not support ramping because it reduces the availability of ambulances to respond to the next emergency. He says they're working with DHBs to limit the problem. The National Party health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse says there are times that the emergency department gets full at the end of winter, but it's happening more often.
The Ministry of Health needs to take the lead and find out whether the anecdotes that are being heard are actually part of a wider trend, and the Minister needs to take responsibility for it.
Health Minister David Clark says ambulance ramping surfaced 2 years ago during the care of the last government. However, he says it's still a rare occurrence.
Obviously in the UK and in Australia it is a big problem and they have had major issues there. That's not a situation I want to see in New Zealand. Obviously it relates to workforce and years of underfunding in our health system, but it is something that we want to make sure we're on top of.
David Clark says there's not a straightforward fix.
These resources are people and their training takes a long period of time. Both senior nurses and clinicians take upwards of 7-10 years to train. So these problems can't necessarily be solved overnight, but it is something that we're working on.
He says the health system could be better, which is why the government launched a health and disability sector review. A final report is due back in March 2020. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
It's 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. This is about our earlier story about a lunch in schools program that the government's announced today, $45 million and 20 pilot schools to begin with. Colleen's got in touch to say, let's celebrate that the government is doing something that will bring immediate benefits. Hungry kids will thank them, teachers will thank them, parents will thank them. Let's not try to find fault for a change. But this one in, lunches for kids by the government will be a complete train wreck. What about all the health and safety regulations around commercial food preparation, and how on earth will schools cope with, and one presumes be responsible for, all the food sensitivities that an array of different kids will have, like allergies, veganism or other cultural requirements, fats and sugar contents, etc. Who will be responsible for a kid with an unknown nut allergy who has a serious reaction to a government peanut butter sandwich? And this one is well in saying children need food earlier in the day. Lunchtime is not halfway through a school day. Interesting point there. If you want to get in contact about that or anything else you've heard on the program so far today, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. An honest politician and the most civil of servants. That's just one of the tributes paid today to Ngāti Hine elder and Waitangi organiser Peter Pirani, who died earlier this week. The 3-term New Zealand First MP was farewelled today at his marae of Motatau in the Bay of Islands. Lois Williams was there.
The bell of the Wharenui tolled at noon as Peter Pirani's coffin was carried out onto the veranda for his funeral. All week, mourners have climbed the hill to the marae in the Marumaku Valley to weep with his family and share their stories at his huimate. Today, more than 200 gathered to pay their last respects to a man described as a quiet achiever and a trusted worker for his people. Peter Pirani began his career as a community worker in Auckland in the 70s and had a distinguished career in the public service. He chaired the Waitangi National Trust for 8 years, served on it for many more, and for more than 2 decades shouldered the sometimes thankless task of organising events at Waitangi. He was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit for his services to Māori and the community. But over the week, every speaker has brought up his personal qualities of courtesy and kindness, as Ngāti Hene's Waihoroi Shortland noted in his eulogy.
It was a little bit of an oxymoron, I think they called it, when they continued to refer to him as an honest politician. But in Peter's case, that was absolutely true. And to which I had the pleasure of replying that he was the most civil of servants.
Also among the mourners today were relatives Colleen and Sid Going.
He was a nice person. He always spoke very nicely and was willing to help and do things.
He always seemed to treat people kindly.
That's right, he didn't push himself out the front.
People respected him for his opinions because of that, didn't they, I think?
Greg McManus, the chief executive of the Waitangi National Trust, says Peter Pirani was an exemplary chairman.
He was so kind to my family. He loved our staff. He always made an effort to go and thank the staff and to talk to them. And he never lost his cool. He was always very calm and considered, and he just had a real genuine love and passion for Waitangi, which was was fantastic.
And the Goings agree.
He got things done without seeming to be in charge, kind of, didn't he?
Yeah, he wasn't the one that says, oh, I did this, I did that, no, I'm doing this. He just quietly did what was needed.
Waihoroi Shortland says Mr Pirani was a private man when it came to his family, but his wife and children and his mokopunas were his sanctuary. And the quiet kaumatua, who didn't like a fuss, told few people he was having surgery last month for a serious heart problem. It came as a shock to many when he died this week in Auckland Hospital. But Waihoroi Shortland says rather than focusing on the great loss of a good man, he prefers to think about what he gave his family, his people and his country.
The gains, when you measure them against the loss of the person now, they outweigh everything else. And it's true of Peter. Our gains through his life far outweigh our loss today.
Peter Pirani was laid to rest this afternoon amid the green hills of Ngāti Hene in his ancestral urupa at Mototau. In Mototau for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
One person has died after a crash in the Waikato tonight. Police say they were called to the scene of the crash on Pairoa Tahuna Road, Otway, at around 5 o'clock. Now, one person has died following the crash, another has serious injuries, and 2 others have moderate injuries. Emergency services are at the scene, and motorists are being warned that the road is closed with diversions in place. Teenage environmental activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in New York after a 15-day, 4,800-kilometre voyage across the Atlantic. She'll be participating in UN climate summits in New York City and Chile. The 16-year-old Swede sailed from Plymouth in the UK on a zero-emissions yacht in order to minimise the carbon footprint of her travel. Our war on nature must end, she told reporters shortly after arriving. The BBC's Chris Buckler was there to meet her.
When world leaders travel to the United Nations, they rarely get a reception like this. The UN brought out a flotilla of boats to welcome a 16-year-old schoolgirl. It's a sign of how much of a figurehead Greta Thunberg has become.
Greta has come to New York to raise concerns about climate change, but even the journey itself was intended to send a message. She wouldn't fly because of the environmental impact. Instead, she spent 2 weeks on a yacht powered only by the wind and sun.
The ground is still shaking for me, but I want to thank everyone so much, everyone who is here, and everyone who is involved in this climate fight, because this is a fight across borders, across continents.
The whole trip was designed to attract publicity, from the online map tracking Greta's progress to the Twitter account posts from the branded boat. The Militia is a racing yacht, fitted with underwater turbines and solar panels. It's designed for long distances, even in rough weather.
We're currently doing between 20 and 25 knots. Last night we hit 30 knots, and we are about 300 miles away from Nova Scotia, and it's very rough with very high waves.
But just as difficult as the sailing have been some of the questions about it. This was promoted as a trip designed to have a zero carbon footprint. But there have been reports that in order to get the yacht back to Europe, some crew members are having to be flown to America. Greta Thunberg has become the face of a campaign. And having made it across continents, she will be a key voice at next month's UN Climate Action Summit here in New York. She also plans to travel to Chile for another conference at the end of the year. But how she gets there and makes it back to Europe in an environmentally friendly way is a question that her team is still trying to answer.
And that was Chris Buckler reporting there. Getting a lot of feedback from you all on the issue of lunches in schools. Government's announced a program today, a pilot program, $45 million, and going into 20 schools to start off with, and then going up to 120 schools by 2021. Shirley Ann's got in touch to say, "Hi Lisa, listening to your interview today with the PM, Jacinda Ardern, you asked the question, why don't you give families extra money rather than free lunches? Lisa, don't be so naive. You and I know that for many, the money can have a high possibility of being spent on cigarettes, alcohol, drugs or gambling. By giving free lunches, we know that the children themselves are the ones that get the benefit." Thanks, Shirley. Appreciate your feedback there. And this one from Mod, who says, "A journey starts with one footstep, and I think the government has done well on this food in schools issue. When I lived and worked in Japan, my son had a cooked meal every day for lunch, as do all primary, intermediate and high school students. Actually, they take it one step further. Students actually prepare or help prepare the meals and do the dishes." Wow. And this teaches young people how to respect food and the people that deliver it. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming, and I'll try and get to some of it a little later in the program. Silver coins dating back to the Battle of Hastings nearly 1,000 years ago have been found by a British couple using a metal detector. The coins show the defeated King Harold and the triumphant William the Conqueror. It's the second largest find of Norman coins ever in the UK. With the details, here's the BBC's John Kay.
Oh my God.
There's pennies everywhere.
In a muddy Somerset field, the discovery of a lifetime.
There's more in there.
This was the moment metal detectorists found more than 2,000 silver coins.
There's another one. Yeah. Lovely.
Today, looking like lottery winners, Lisa Grace and her partner Adam Staples came to inspect their jackpot.
They're in fantastic condition.
Now all cleaned up and catalogued at the British Museum in London.
Just a fantastic find, and I don't think we'll ever find anything like it again.
No, it's a dream come true.
I think it's King Harold.
Experts say the hoard is hugely significant. Half the coins are from the reign of King Harold II. The rest were minted when Harold was defeated by William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066.
There's another one as well.
Lisa, Adam and their friends couldn't believe it when their metal detectors just kept beeping.
It went from 2 to 10 to 50 to 100 to, wow, how many are there? And from then on, it was just crazy.
That's a lot of beeps.
Yeah.
I bet you were saying quite a lot of beeps as well, weren't you, as it happened?
There was a lot of swearing going on.
The precise location where the hoard was found is being kept top secret, but it's somewhere in the Chew Valley.
If a coroner declares it treasure, then the landowner and the group of metal detectorists could share a reward, possibly millions of pounds.
So what are you going to do with the money when it comes?
Maybe buy a house. Yeah.
Maybe more than one.
It's hoped the hoard will go on display in Somerset, although at least one private collector also wants to buy it.
What an incredible find. That was John Kay there with a very happy and now likely very rich British couple. More on the story about the lunch program announced today by the government. This one in from a listener. Team Jacinda must exercise their intellect to establish how they can terminate the never-ending cycle of dependency by poor parents who produce carbon copy offspring who expect support to emanate from anyone but themselves. The ambulance at the bottom of the cliff needs to be replaced by personal energy, initiative and honesty. If Jacinda fails to grasp this reality, time will reveal her shortcomings and the mushrooming problem will be left to the coming generations. Jay has been in touch as well and says if lunch money were given directly to parents, quite a bureaucracy would be needed to administer the scheme. Why? Because the number of children would vary and children would cease to qualify once they went to high school. Mike from Dunedin says, well, the Nats would tell the kids to eat cake, so let's just thank Labor for trying. And this one in saying any increase in welfare payments or minimum wage rates is quickly absorbed by increased rents. A food in schools program makes sure that children benefit and not landlords. This person says give the money to schools for recognised programs. Giving money to parents is not wise as they may spend it on alcohol, pokies or drugs. Each school should be able to enter into agreements with contractors to provide the school with food. Such contracts need to be approved by the ministry. Thanks for that, Bonnie.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Prime Minister says the government's free school lunches program announced today can be implemented differently at each school. The daily free lunch will initially be served from the first term next year in 30 Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay primary and intermediate schools, identified as having high levels of disadvantage. Jacinda Ardern told Checkpoint next year's trial will give an indication how the program can work in different environments.
Within each school, we expect that they may choose to do it a little bit differently. I've talked to some schools, for instance, who've suggested they might like to try and create employment out of this program, so make the school lunches themselves as a way of having a double benefit for their community. Others may choose to contract, say, a local bakery.
Jacinda Ardern. The intention is to extend the program to 120 schools in 2020, after which its future will be decided. Public health experts are concerned Auckland's measles outbreak might spread throughout the country. The Ministry of Health is trying to contain the outbreak by warning people not to travel to Auckland if they have not been immunised. Out of fear, they'll take the disease back home with them when they leave. The vast majority of the 850 cases reported nationally this year have been in Auckland. Michael Baker, who's a professor of public health at Otago University, says getting vaccinated is not just for a person's own safety, but for that of others who can't be vaccinated, such as unwell people.
It is a form of social responsibility to protect very vulnerable people and young children. So I think we could do more to promote it and really have that discussion about just this critical importance that it has for all New Zealanders to be vaccinated to protect these.
Michael Baker of Otago University. Business confidence has slumped to the point where more firms are pessimistic about their own prospects than those who are not. The ANZ Business Outlook for August shows individual businesses have turned negative about their own outlook for the first time since April 2009. Employment, investment and export intentions and profit expectations are now at what ANZ calls dismal levels. The bank's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, says there are still positives about the economy, but businesses are ignoring them.
I think there is a real risk at this point that we might be talking ourselves into something of a slowdown. It does seem pretty clear that in the near term the economy is going to continue to lose momentum.
Sharon Zollner says another interest rate cut seems likely to give further support to economic activity. An Auckland civil construction firm says companies need to give job seekers a chance. The Auckland Council is partnering with the Ministry of Social Development to create 60 jobs for those on a benefit and businesses contracted to its water infrastructure projects worth billions of dollars. Mackenzie and Palmer has already hired several job seekers for its Awakere wetlands project. Its General Manager Chris Rose says people need to be given a chance.
Once they feel like the companies believes in them, 95% of them will just work and enjoy the company. You just got to show that you do believe in them, because a lot of them have been knocked down and they don't have that belief. But once you give them that belief that they are important, they are valuable, it just flows through on work.
Chris Rose of Mackenzie and Palmer. A US Navy destroyer has sailed near islands claimed by China in the South China Sea. A move likely to anger Beijing at a time of rising tensions between the world's two largest economies. The Navy's 7th Fleet says the Wayne E. Meyer, a guided missile destroyer, came within 22 kilometres of Fiery Cross and Mischief Reefs. A spokesperson says the operation was conducted to, quote, challenge excessive maritime claims and preserve access to the waterways as governed by international law. The Chinese military says the destroyer encroached on Chinese territorial waters near the Spratly Islands without the government's permission and had been warned to leave. Transport agency officials have confirmed that their advice to fast-track a second tunnel through Wellington's Mount Victoria was ignored. At a select committee briefing on the Let's Get Wellington Moving programme today, the National MP Nicola Willis repeated her allegation that the Green MP Julianne Genter secretly lobbied to get the tunnel pushed back to 2029 or later. She tabled advice from the agency and a draft cabinet paper recommending work get underway by 2024 and questioned the agency's chief executive, Matt Ratcliffe, about what happened.
So was your official advice that the Mount Vic tunnel should happen sooner rather than later?
Yes, it was.
When Mr Ratcliffe agreed with that statement, Ms Willis said this was confirmation the government had ignored the agency's official advice. A developer's contract clause preventing Wanaka subdivision residents from speaking out is being challenged in the High Court. Northlake's purchase and sale agreement prevents owners from submitting against any of the developer's plans and requires residents to give their unqualified approval if requested. When a controversial 113-room hotel in the subdivision was notified, residents were unable to make a submission against it. The president of a lobby group called Wanaka Community Supporting Our Northlake Neighbours, Neve Shaw, says court papers were filed earlier this week.
There's currently nobody holding this developer and any other developer accountable, because at the hearing, the wider community submissions were basically dismissed because we were not directly affected.
Neve Shaw says residents have a democratic right to voice their opinion. It's 6:06. The All Blacks midfielder Sonny Bill Williams says it's great to reconnect with members of Canterbury's Muslim community as anticipation builds ahead of the Rugby World Cup. A day after their selection for the tournament, Williams and 3 teammates visited Muslim children being helped by the Canterbury Resilience Foundation, a charity that supports young people affected by the March mosque attacks. He says he was glad he got the chance to return to Christchurch as groups of All Blacks spread out around the country today to visit with fans.
A cool initiative by the All Blacks to show some love to those affected down here in Christchurch, and obviously me and Offa being Muslims, we're proud to come and represent All Blacks and show some love.
Sonny Bill Williams. The former England rugby international James Haskell says he's serious about a career in mixed martial arts. Haskell ended his 17-year professional rugby career in May and has dived straight back into MMA after striking a deal with a promoter. The 34-year-old isn't sure, though, whether his limited wrestling experience will be of any help.
MMA is completely different because you've got to do all those disciplines while someone's trying to elbow, knee you, punch you in the face. And I think, Mike Tyson said it, everyone's got a plan until you get hit in the face. I'm dedicating my life to this. I want to make sure that I'm in the best possible shape, whatever happens at the end of it.
A date has yet to be set for Haskell's debut in the cage. And the start of the Black Caps T20 match against Sri Lankan board Presidents 11 has been delayed by rain. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the vanishing world of the humble British pub. Eleanor Tremere debuts as our new cultural ambassador from Planet Science Fiction with a look at the dystopian-utopian duality. Do you like your future Blade Runner style, or are you more of a Star Trekker? Or, heaven forbid, a Jetsonian? And John's chosen the little piece of heaven to get us all into a happy place after the news at 7, with me, Brian Crump, on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland mainly fine, the odd shower in the west tonight. Auckland to Horowhenua, including Coromandel, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Isolated showers, cloud increasing tomorrow, then rain north of Taranaki from tomorrow afternoon, clearing from the south later in the day. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly fine. Isolated showers in Bay of Plenty tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow afternoon with scattered rain. Wairarapa, Kapiti and Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough. Mainly fine, isolated showers overnight, retreating to the Tararua Range and District tomorrow morning. Canterbury and Otago excluding Clutha, brief showers spreading north tonight, fine tomorrow. Southland and Clutha, occasional showers retreating to the south coast early tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers easing tonight, becoming fine in Westland. Cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the coast and fjords. Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, rain overnight, then isolated showers. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A pilot program to give kids a free lunch is expected to be rolled out to more than 120 schools by 2021. Today, the Prime Minister announced a program to feed hungry children would be trialled next year in 30 schools centred around the Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. The price tag, $45 million. But there's no details of exactly how the new service will be delivered. Individual schools are being left to decide that themselves. The Prime Minister says the government will keep funding other school food programs alongside its lunch program. Now, KidsCan is one of those programs and founder Julie Chapman is on the line now. Good evening, Julie. Have they got this largely right, do you think?
I think this is a positive move. I think to appreciate the scale of the issue, and certainly in terms of what we do, we're already providing food in 740 schools, supporting 30,000 children a day, and we certainly can't keep up with the demand. We have 38 schools waiting and more than 100 early childhood centres who actually need this program.
Well, that's interesting. So 100 early childhood centres. This new program will only target primary and intermediate. Does it go far enough in your view?
I think it's a good start, but certainly what we have found over the past 14 years of doing this work is that the need has increased, and recently early childhood centres were reaching out to us and telling us that younger children indeed were going hungry and missing out on those basics that we've been providing in schools.
So it's going to grow to 120 schools. The budget's $45 million. Knowing what you do about how much your work costs, how does that budget seem?
Yeah, speaking from our perspective, I can tell you that on an annual basis, KidsCan puts $2 million into food items. We provide bread, baked beans, hot meals, spreads, yoghurt, muesli bars, and we are able to, through our supplier relationships and procurement, to deliver $4 million worth of value, which is providing food for 30,000 children a day currently.
So, through your buying power and relationships, you basically double your real cash, correct?
Absolutely. So for every dollar we invest in food, we deliver $2 in value.
Okay, so the Prime Minister has said that the government's going to leave it up to individual schools to deliver their lunch program how they see fit. What do you think of that?
I think there's a real opportunity for government and organisations like ourselves to play a part in procuring the best prices possible for food items, in particular fresh food items that schools can then access through a collective kind of bargaining power.
Can you give us an example of that? Sorry, Julie, to interrupt, but can you give us a tangible example?
Yes, I can. So when we were costing moving into early childhood, for example, we went out to a range of suppliers. We asked them for their costings. In particular, just giving one example, we asked for fruit costings. Now, what we found was that the government-funded agency, Fruit in Schools, was actually 3 times the price of the Countdown product that we now use and have delivered to those early childhoods. So I guess, without knowing more detail, my one kind of reservation and what I'd like to see is that this money, which is taxpayer money, is used in the best way possible, procuring the best quality food, but for the best prices, and not necessarily leaving it up to schools themselves to have to build those relationships in procurement and supply chains.
So just for a minute, imagine that you're given the $45 million. How would you work it?
So I think what we've identified over the last sort of 6 months is there is a particular need and a growing need in early childhood, so under 5s. We know that there are about 1,000 early childhood centres that are community-based, so not privately owned, and what they call equity 1 to 4. So I guess if someone was to front up and give us $45 million tomorrow, I would certainly invest it there in the first instance, because I think it's so important for our littlest children in their first 1,000 days to get the nutrition they need, but also to participate in education. And certainly the research project that we have running alongside this program, which is a 2-year project, is already revealing that children are happier, healthier, and roll numbers and participation has increased significantly.
Julie, just quickly before you go, the government is aiming to feed kids at 120 schools with $45 million. You say that you're in 740 schools, was it, around about, with $2 million. So with the $45 million, how many schools do you reckon you could get into? Could you do them all?
Well, look, we've always been really specific about, working in decile 1 to 4 schools where the most need is. I think it's important to note that between Kickstart, KidsCan, we have more than 80% coverage of schools across New Zealand. I guess we would use the money to expand on what we do. It's always been a challenge for us to feed every child in a school because of limited funding. But in saying that, our schools are free to implement the program as they see fit, and they can right now order as much food as they need for their children. So I guess it would mean that we could do more, do it better, and reach more children.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is Julie Chapman, who is the founder of the KidsCan program, who obviously provides food and other resources to underprivileged children. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Public health experts say they're concerned Auckland's measles outbreak will soon become a nationwide problem. The Ministry of Health is trying to contain an escalating number of cases in the city and is warning people not to travel to Auckland if they're not immunised. So far, there have been 850 cases of the infectious virus across the country, with about 1 in 3 needing hospital attention. And the outbreak has escalated, with more than a quarter of the cases happening in Auckland in the last 2 weeks. Jordan Bond reports.
Manurewa High School in South Auckland is the latest to be hit with the measles outbreak. 13 of its students have contracted the virus so far, and 300 have been sent home in recent weeks to help manage its spread. It's part of the worst measles outbreak in 20 years, which is so far mostly contained to Auckland. But health officials say it could get a lot worse if the virus is carried to other parts of the country.
I think there's high risk of it reaching other regions.
Dr Jill Sherwood from ESR, the country's Crown Research Institute, says there are 2 main risks.
The first is that this will get much larger in the Auckland region. The second is that because of travel, we could start to see it spreading more in other parts of the country.
This afternoon, Waikato DHB said the region's had 3 new cases in the last couple of weeks, some of which are linked to neighbouring South Auckland. There have been 230 cases of measles in Auckland in the last fortnight, and only 10 cases elsewhere in the country. Dr William Ranger from Auckland Regional Public Health says numbers have been increasing quite dramatically in the last month or so.
There's no end in sight in Auckland. It's continuing to increase. We can't really predict when it will peak.
Dr Ranger says family doctors have reported high demand for the MMR vaccine in the last few weeks and that people are heeding warnings. Vaccination rates for children at 5 years of age are slowly increasing. 5 years ago, 79% of children starting school were immunised. That's up to 88% this year. But even that isn't a safe level. 95% is the golden number, which provides herd immunity. Professor of Public Health at Otago University, Dr Michael Baker, says even outside of that not being high enough, adults, mostly in their 20s and 30s, also have low immunisation rates.
And because we're below that level in these particular cohorts, this immunity gap, basically the measles is so infectious it finds that gap. And wherever that gap exists in New Zealand, it's going to find it. So it's inevitable that in other parts of New Zealand we will see more measles cases until we can close that gap.
The West Coast, Bay of Plenty and Northland have the lowest school starter immunisation rates in the low 80%. Dr Baker says there's actually quite a low number of people who choose not to vaccinate, and most people just haven't got around to it. But he says people have a public health responsibility. Young babies and unwell people can't get vaccinated and therefore are at a higher risk of getting measles. He says there's a discussion to be had about making vaccinations compulsory.
It is a form of social responsibility to protect very vulnerable people and young children. So I think we could do more to promote it and really have that discussion about just this critical importance that it has for all New Zealanders to be vaccinated to protect these vulnerable groups.
The Director of Public Health at the Ministry of Health, Dr Carolyn McElnay, says they're taking this large outbreak very seriously and are working closely with the worst-hit DHB, Counties Manukau. She says getting nurses in malls and churches to boost immunisation rates will happen, but it's still in the planning stage.
So our focus has really been around getting the message out there for people to go and be vaccinated. What we're seeing lately on the advice from Counties Manukau is we need to step up and support them to put in place some additional services so that people who haven't accessed their primary care can access those additional services.
There are a handful of national secondary school sports tournaments in the next few weeks, with thousands of young people in close contact. The main message from health officials: go get vaccinated. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
And we've just heard from Counties Manukau DHB. It says there'll be immunisations at the Manukau Super Clinic on Saturday and a drop-in clinic at Clendon Shopping Centre. And training for nurses in high schools is already underway. It says there will be other places for immunisations in the community that will be announced shortly. It's almost 21 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government and Auckland Council say they're landing jobs for beneficiaries as part of a scheme to deal with the looming skills gap. As they pour billions of dollars into infrastructure projects, they're aiming to use people who've faced major hurdles in finding employment. It also means they'll be off the benefit and contributing by paying taxes. Tom Furley has the story.
Life has been tough for solo mother of 4, Georgina Takimoana.
We had to struggle for years. We'd always get our power disconnected because it was just not enough. I couldn't cover everything. And because I couldn't work all the time, they never got anything. Birthdays, anything like that. That was just a novelty. The beach was our thing. We had to make do with whatever we had. So I really wanted a job because my kids were missing out on lots and they were always, those kids.
She says finding work was hard while juggling the demands of solo parenthood.
My youngest is now 15. I was on a benefit when she was born, sort of in and out of jobs like with agencies and stuff like that, but my main income was the benefit. The last Well, I'd say 3 years. I've been on the actual benefit, like without working anywhere else. I wanted full-time work where I could work within the boundaries of my children as well, and that was really hard to find.
But now that her children are older, Work and Income has set her up with a conservation course, which helped her land a job as a labourer with civil construction firm Mackenzie & Palmer. She's working full-time to transform the Awakere wetlands in Takanini.
I absolutely love it because I've got a purpose. I know that someday somebody's going to come in here and go, wow, this is beautiful, and know that I had a hand in it. I feel so good.
She says her lifestyle and the stresses of life have changed. She wants to get into diggers and machinery down the track. The Ministry of Social Development has partnered with Auckland Council to support people like Georgina Takimoana into work. Auckland Council says it'll be encouraging contractors involved in its water infrastructure projects to get involved. The General Manager of Mackenzie & Palmer, Chris Rose, says giving people a chance is a win-win in the face of skills shortages.
Once they feel like the companies believe in them, 95% of them will just work and enjoy the company. You just got to show that you do believe in them, because a lot of them have been knocked down and they don't have that belief. But once you give them that belief that they are important, they are valuable, it just flows through on work.
The Mayor, Phil Goff, says young people in particular will be a focus. He says MSD will also be paying employers who successfully train people into the workforce.
That payment is about $10,000, but that gets a person that's been on the dole for some time out of that habit of dependency and into the workforce. So it's a great investment. It gets repaid many times in terms of the people no longer being dependent on a benefit, actually out there working and paying taxation.
6 people have already been hired under the partnership, with the aim of employing 60 in the first year. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
And let's get to a bit more of your feedback now. A few of you have been getting in touch throughout the program saying it's better for the money to be put into the school lunch program than for it to go straight into the pockets of lower income families. And a lot of you have said that people can't be trusted not to spend the money on, quote, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs and gambling. Bet has been in contact and says, oh goodness, don't we just love stereotypes? All those nasty poor peasants, give them some money and it will go straight to drugs and alcohol and cigarettes. While at the school I work at, there are so many poor families where alcohol is just too expensive, cigarettes are out of the question, and the kids are having to look after themselves because both parents are working bloody hard, long hours in order to be able to afford rent, power and food. Oh, the judgment, says Bet. And this one in from Jerry that says, why is it that there is always a vocal minority who are always looking at why we can't do things? The UK and other nations have school lunches and cope with all the issues mentioned. One of the real benefits is that kids get to eat food that they may not have got at home due to their parents' biases. You've still got time to get in touch on this one before 6:30, 2101 on the text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The tills began ringing today at what will be the country's largest mall, aka Living Centre. 40 stores opened their doors in the Westfield Newmarket in Auckland, with that number expected to swell to 230 by Christmas. Shoppers were able to buy everything from a hoodie to a $445 gold lobster called Larry. Our reporter Katie Doyle went along as well.
So how long have you been waiting here this morning?
5 hours.
And so what time did you get here?
4 a.m.
That's Virginia. She woke up at 3:30 this morning to be the first in line for Huffer. One of the shops opened today inside the new Westfield Centre. She's thrilled with the new building, which spans 3 floors and is so far home to 40 stores like Kathmandu, EB Games, Rebel Sport and upmarket furniture store Coco Republic.
Absolutely excited by it all. It's a stunning building and it's going to really enhance Newmarket. We're really thrilled to be here today, and we'll be regular patrons of this new centre.
With its marble look floors, open spaces and sleek design, the $790 million so-called Living Centre has aspirations to be a cut above normal shopping malls. Warren Johns, who's 74, says it seems like a nice place to sit and watch the world go by.
I've only been in here for about 10 minutes. I'm just sitting down enjoying an ice cream and watching all the people pass by. But I like it. Of course, it's very modern. There are lots of shops here. I haven't been into many of the shops. But one thing that I do like, it's a place where you can sit down and relax.
But that's not the reason for his visit.
I'm coming here because there might be something free. And, of course, to look at the building. But quite often, and it's advertised that there's something you can get free, you see. I've got some jelly beans, so that's a good start.
Despite the freebies and the ribbon cutting, some patrons seemed a tad confused about the Living Centre label. After all, it does look suspiciously like a mall. But spokesperson Paul Gardner says there is a difference.
Up to 40% of all of the services here are either connected with leisure or entertainment. No longer is this about just a simple transaction when you would make a purchase and leave with that purchase. This now becomes a public space, a place to be.
The centre is set for expansion later this year, with the rooftop dining precinct still under construction. It's expected to be completed by the end of the year, when it will be home to more than 200 stores across 4.5 acres and 5 levels of retail. In Newmarket, for Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
And before we go, some more feedback on things that have been on your mind in the show today. Justin's been in contact saying, we lived in China for 10 years. All of the primary and secondary schools there provided a nutritious cooked lunch to all students. It takes the stress out of family life with youngsters and lunch planning routine, and is a very cost-effective way to help society improve health and educational outcomes. Julie is right. The government should indeed facilitate group buying, and that's Julie he's referring to from KidsCan program. And Francis has been in touch to say drinks, veggies and pokies, that old lie was laid to rest some time ago. There is plenty of research which shows parents go without and spend any spare money on food, clothes and housing for their children. Also, this one, congratulations to the government for finally helping New Zealand catch up with the rest of the world. I grew up in Tahiti in the 70s and we had a sit-down, varied lunch of cooked meat, fish, vegetables and fruit every day. The US and Britain have sit-down lunches in their schools. Why shouldn't we? And this one, can we stop propagating the myths about how low-income families spend their dollars on drugs, alcohol, cigarettes and pokies? It is well disproved and frankly insulting to many. Thank you all for getting in touch this evening. Don't forget, you can go onto our Facebook page and our webpage to look back at some of those picture stories. Alex Peretay's story about measles and Andrew McRae there with the school's lunch program as well. We will be back tomorrow. Do join us again then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A free lunch trial will start next year in 30 Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay schools identified as having high levels of disadvantage. Health officials are concerned Auckland's measles outbreak might spread throughout the country and are warning people who aren't immunised to avoid the city. Doctors say delays in patients being seen at emergency departments are getting worse because of under-resourcing. And Transport Agency officials being questioned at a select committee confirmed their advice to fast-track a second tunnel through Mount Victoria was ignored. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
In Ohio, these are people just dying on the side of the road of an overdose.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
She was sure, and she had evidence that she had had the immunisation back in the day, and she still contracted measles.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
I counted 20